Good morning. Welcome to Connection, coming to you from Spirit and Truth Sanctuary on a rainy day in Georgia. But we need it. We have needed it. We have been dry for a while. So, well, some parts haven't. In summertime, Georgia's just kind of like a terrarium. You remember those things from the 70s? It's just always, in the summertime, it's just always kind of wet always. Okay, let's begin with our morning blessing. Spirit of Truth, we give thanks today for our connection in this time of togetherness, for our sameness as well as our contrast, and for the light we reflect to one another and see in one another. We give thanks for the holy that holds us and for the humanity that always brings us back to the holy. We ask that our happiness, our peace, and our joy now be woven into the fabric of the world around us, and that it serve as nourishment to feed the heart of the collective. In the name and nature of the Christ, amen, and so it is. All right, on to our quotes. First, by a woman named Helen, I think it's Schuckman, who was one of the authors of A Course in Miracles. She says, "The holiest place on earth is where an ancient hatred has become a present love." Next, "He who angers you controls you." Next, Maria Shriver, "My words have impact. They can build someone up or tear them down. They can provide hope or create despair. I must remember to use them wisely. Use them to make someone's day, not ruin it." All right, so those are our quotes for today, and I actually borrowed them from a teaching I did some time ago that is going to be a part of today's teaching as well. But a lot of today's teaching is going to be about the choice that we all have, as it said in that last quote, about how we choose to use our words, and to extend it further, about what we choose to focus on, about what we choose to let inside us and take up residence. Whether we're talking to others or to ourselves, we can use our words, also our thoughts, our intentions, our focus, etc., to build up or to tear down, to provide hope or to create despair, to make our day or someone else's, or to ruin it. And one of the best choices we can make in the face of any challenging circumstance is to laugh, because laughter pretty much always builds up, unless it's the kind of laughter that results from ridicule, but that's not what I'm talking about today. Good laughter always builds us up, it always provides hope, and certainly makes our day. It can sometimes even take a ruined day and turn it around. So I want to start today by giving you a little insight into how this teaching came to be, how my particular process works, and how I'm always experiencing these little synchronicities and receiving signs that I'm on the right track. So Sunday morning, 2 days ago, right as I pulled into the church parking lot, I got a text from my husband that said, and forgive his language, which I will edit a bit for television, but he's Latin, and therefore he has strong opinions that he expresses strongly. So his text to me says, blanking, that's not the word he used, Trump is running again in 2024. Now, as they say on the news, I have not independently confirmed this information. He says he heard it on the radio. Regardless, it's a possibility. We all know this. So he sends me this text, and I've just dropped Mom out off at the door of the church and pulled into a parking space. So I look down and I check my phone and I see this message. And honestly, my immediate response was just to throw my head back and laugh out loud all by myself in the car. It's kind of like my brother said just an hour or so later in his message, which will also be a part of today's teaching. He said, "When you know that you are approved by God and that you approve of yourself, there's a peace that begins to resonate inside of you. And out of that peace, out of that space of being comfortable in your own skin, out of that knowing who you are, comes a joy. All of a sudden, there is laughter. There is an ability to see the humorous side of everything. Even when you're in the midst of a storm, you can say, it can't get any worse. I've got good news for you, everybody. There's no way it can get any worse." So when I saw that text, my point is, because I'm okay with who I am, and because I know that regardless of who gets elected and sits in the Oval Office, I'm going to be okay, and because that's not where my trust is anyway, and because I regularly am putting in deposits of joy into the bank account of my life, that was my reaction. I just laughed. And my response to him via text was, ha ha, well, here we go. It's truly the end of the world as we know it, but that's actually a good thing because the world as we know it isn't working very well. And I really mean that. I remember saying way back 6 or 7 years ago when he ran the first time, he's not my choice and I'm not voting for him, but if he wins, I'm going to be just fine. And I was and am. More importantly, though, I also said if Biden wins, I can't just say, whew, well, everything's all right now. Everybody can just relax because he's got it. Meaning the days of putting everything, our entire destiny into one man's hands or a few men or even one political party to be the savior, those days are over. It's got to be a group effort, and we all have to take personal responsibility now. Now, does this mean I wouldn't or don't prefer one over the other? No, of course, I have a preference and I have an opinion, but all of my hope for the future and all of my confidence and my well-being is not wrapped up in who the president is, no matter who that happens to be. That's what I said then, and that is what I still believe. So when I heard that news, which could be considered bad or disturbing, to me, it might be great for somebody else, my first response was to laugh and say to myself as well as to my husband, okay, buckle up. It's going to be a rough ride, but we're going to be okay. Instead of wringing my hands about it and letting it ruin my entire day. And here's the synchronicity. I get inside the church, and what is my brother's sermon topic? Laughter. And how laughter is a choice no matter what you're going through. And that joy is something that comes from the inside, no matter how bad the outer circumstances seem to be at the moment. It's like this scene from one of my favorite movies. My brother talked about one of his favorite movies, or several of his favorite movies on Sunday, so I'll give you a little scene from one of my favorite movies. Long time ago, I believe it was 1986, the movie The Money Pit with Tom Hanks and Shelley Long. Okay, so they have bought this old rundown house, and they are in the process of restoring it, of rehabilitating it. And they have just had issue after issue after issue with the restoring this old house. So the bathtub, the water won't get hot. So every time they want to take a bath, they have to go put the water on the stove, like, in the olden days, and warm it up and take it up and pour it into the tub. So he's in the process of doing this, and so he walks into the kitchen with his shorty shorts on, which everybody wore in the 80s, when I looked up this particular scene again yesterday, and it is so hilarious to look back and see what we wore and how our hair was. So Tom Hanks, who is unarguably my favorite actor, he walks into the kitchen and he checks the water, and it's not quite ready yet. So he gets a magazine and he sits down, and so he reaches and just flips the light switch on beside him, and all of a sudden it just sparks, and he can see the fire. It's following the line of the wire all through the wall of the kitchen, and it explodes the blender, and it pops the turkey out of the oven, and the entire kitchen just basically is destroyed. So the next scene is he's just taking the water up the stairs, and he just looks at his wife and he's like, I don't want to talk about what just happened in the kitchen. I just want to relax in a hot bath. And she's like, okay. So when he pours the water in, the tub just falls through the floor, which is the ceiling of the second floor, and the bathtub bursts into a million pieces on the lower floor. And so they're looking over the big hole in the floor, and he just goes, aha. And then I can't do it like he does, but he just like forces himself to laugh so hard that he starts wheezing, and it just goes on and on for like 3 minutes, and it's literally one of the funniest scenes I have ever watched in a movie. And when I need a laugh, that is one of my go-tos. So sometimes things are so bad, all you can do is laugh. All right, continuing on now with my synchronicities. So that was the first one, that I had just had this reaction of laughter to something that could have upset me, only to walk in and hear a message about that very thing. Then, as I'm sitting there listening to the message, a past teaching I had done, it's reminding me of these points that I had made in this past teaching that I had done, and it was called Happy to Be Exactly Where You Are, and for everyone else to be exactly where they are. And then a little further into the message, I start making connections to this podcast that I had been listening to while I was getting ready that morning. And all of a sudden, I knew what I was going to speak about today. Within the space of just a few hours, all of those things came together perfectly and gave me the inspiration for this teaching today, which will be a synthesis of those three things. My brother's message from Sunday, this podcast I was listening to Sunday morning right before church, and the previous teaching I did a few years back that came to my mind. Today's going to be a mashup of all that, and I'm titling it, Can't We All Just Get Along? If everybody remembers that from the early 90s, that whole situation with Rodney King. Can't we just all get along? So I think I'll start with the podcast I was listening to. It was by a guy that I follow on YouTube. His name is Aubrey Marcus. He's a brilliant young man, and he's interviewing a man named Robert Grant, who is, among other things, a mathematician, a symbologist, and an expert on the symbols and codes inside the Egyptian pyramids. I think he is the person that Tom Hanks's character, Robert Langdon, in all of the Da Vinci Code movies, I think this is the real-life guy that his character is based on. His name is even Robert. When you hear him talk, you kind of know that's who it was based on. So he's being interviewed, and he starts his comments with this quote. He says, "The one divided itself into two for the joy of becoming one again." To me, now this is him talking, I'm quoting, this is really beautiful statement, and I would even expand it to say, the one divided itself into the many for the joy of becoming one again. And I think that this is a moment in time where humanity is going through that process. A lot of people right now are looking at solving problems we're facing from a purely technological standpoint. And technology is great. It can solve a lot of things. It has its place. But the big move that needs to be made is a shift in consciousness, because without that, all the technological fixes will be meaningless. We as a society have become more and more dualistic over the last few thousand years in every aspect. We've been in the age of Pisces, which is symbolized by two fish tied together but swimming in opposite directions. Now, I had never heard Pisces described like that before. I always knew it was the age of the fish, but then if you look at it, it is two fish, and they are facing opposite directions. So listen to what he says here. We've been in the age of Pisces, which is symbolized by two fish tied together but swimming in opposite directions, each thinking they are the light and the other is the dark, that they are good and the other is bad. And none of us seem to realize that because of our own filters and biases, the things we think are ethical are just the things that benefit us. And then we want to force and impose our ethics on everybody else because we tend to see the world as we are rather than as it truly is. And somewhere along the way, in all of this dualistic thinking and behavior, we have lost our ability to empathize, our ability to step into another person's shoes and see the world from their perspective. I think it's because we've gotten stuck in either left-brained or right-brained thinking, and in our current climate, never the twain shall meet. Thank God for the people who still make art and correct things and create things that bring joy into the world. But most people now are on the opposite pole and are much more concerned with the materiality of the world. And that's where I was, this is him still talking, until I went through the proverbial midlife crisis. But the good thing for me was I didn't go out and buy a Porsche because I already had a few. So Okay, so then the other guy who's interviewing him interrupts and says, it's funny, just as a bracketed side note, that the solution most people apply when they're having this midlife crisis you're talking about is more of the same. They double down on the very thing that's causing them the problem. In other words, this overemphasis on material things is what's causing them emotional distress, because they're realizing at this stage of their life that those things are not what bring true happiness. So what do? Go buy more things that are nicer and more expensive. And then they both laugh because of the truth in that. And the other guy continues by saying, isn't it interesting that that's how so many choose to solve their problems without realizing that everything we judge in the world around us is what we will attract. Okay, time out. I want to stop right here and back up just a bit. Going back to my text on Sunday morning with my husband, the very last text I sent him, it said, he, and I was referring to Trump, is just a big fat mirror to show this country what we have become. And I wanted to insert that here because what they were just talking about is the fact that because our society has become so dualistic in our thinking and in our behavior, believing that you have to be on one side or the other, there are very few who are truly in the middle. We've become really polarized. So because this is the case, we feel that imbalance when our emotions get out of whack. But because we're in this state, our gut reaction is to move further into whatever side we're already on instead of toward the middle, toward the other people. And if you think about it, that is the epitome of what Donald Trump represents. He can never be wrong. So when someone calls him out or questions him, tells him he's wrong, he doubles down. When someone catches him in a lie, he just tells a bigger one. And unfortunately, that behavior is a reflection of a huge portion of our society. And unfortunately, again, that's why a lot of people like him, because they resonate with him. So let's go back to the interview and see what Robert Grant talks about this, what he says about this idea. He says, I heard judgment explained once as going into a cave, and anybody you want to place in the cave of judgment, you must follow them in there in order to judge them. Then, once you're in the cave, the law of resonance is applied because like attracts like. So when you judge others, it's like putting yourself in resonance with judgment, and therefore, that's what you attract to yourself, judgment. I often say to people, if you spot it, you got it. Because many times the things that trigger you most in others are the things about yourself you don't like, don't accept, and therefore have suppressed. But when you see them in someone else, they come back up again. So life is about us learning to transcend this polarized perception of dualism and replace judgment of others with love and acceptance. All right. So at this point, I want to leave Mr. Marcus and Mr. Grant and go to my teaching from a while back, because it is dealing with the same subject, how important and imperative it is for us to drop our judgment of each other. And so I was explaining my title, which was Happy to Be Exactly Where You Are. And then I said, but wait, there's more. You can't just end there. It's not enough just to be happy where you are, and happy for everyone else to be exactly where they are. That part's a little tougher sometimes. For some of us, it's difficult to get to the place where we're happy, exactly where we are, content with the present moment. But usually we can find a way to get there. Being happy, content, or at least okay with where everybody else is on their journey is a little more challenging, but it is just as important. Ram Dass has a beautiful quote that I actually borrowed as a title for another one of my teachings, and it was, we're all just walking each other home. So recently someone sent me a piece also written by Ram Dass where he expands a little bit on this quote of his. He says, from the soul's point of view, you come to appreciate that each one of us is living out his or her own karma, which is just another way of saying we're all on our own journey. We interact together, and those interactions are just grist for each other's mill of awakening. All right, so time out again. If you're not familiar with that terminology, grist means grain that gets ground into flour by those old-fashioned water wheel apparatuses. And it's defined when used metaphorically as something that can be used for a particular purpose. And the example sentence that's given is, now that he's a writer, he regards his difficult childhood experiences as grist for the mill. In other words, something he has learned and grown from, he now uses in his writing. So, Ram Dass is saying here that our interactions with each other as each of us is living out our own individual karma and on our own individual journey is just material we can and should use for our own individual growth and awakening process. He goes on, from your personality's point of view, another name for personality is your ego, you develop judgment. But from the soul's point of view, you develop appreciation. This shift from judging to appreciating is appreciating yourself and what your karmic predicament is and who other beings are with their own karma. This shift from judging to appreciating brings everything into a simple, loving awareness. To be free means to open your heart and your being to the fullness of who you are. Because only when you are resting in that place of unity can you truly honor and appreciate others and the incredible diversity of the universe. Okay, beautiful. We always talk about that. It all starts inside. So, also, as we've talked about many times, truth is held in the tension between opposites. Now, follow my logic here. That means in order for us to find the truth, according to that definition, opposites must necessarily exist. There can be no tension between opposites unless there are first opposites. That's true for us here on our earthly journey because Earth is a place of duality. We've also talked about that before. In heaven, in the spirit realm, everything is oneness. But here on Earth, we learn about things by comparing them to their opposite. We can trace that all the way back to choosing to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Ever since that happened, we as humans have lived in a dualistic world. It's just reached its zenith now, as Robert Grant was just talking about. And what Ram Dass is saying here is, okay, this is the situation. I'm on my journey, working out my stuff. You're on yours, working out yours. We're all different. But that provides the opportunity to judge, to look at someone's journey and life experience that is the opposite or an opposite of yours and to judge it, to say, well, they should be doing it more like me. But it also provides the opportunity for you to shift that judgment into appreciation and therefore use it to help you along your journey. Your journey to where? To awakening, to oneness, back home where we came from. That's what he meant when he said, we're all just walking each other home, going from this journey we're having down here on earth of duality back to our home, which is oneness. Okay, so in a very strategic way, we're meant to be different. And I was thinking the other day, this has always been the case since the dawn of time as we know it, since man has existed. But lately, the process seems to have sped up a little because, in my opinion, and as Robert Grant was talking about, we're getting closer and closer to this shift from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. And so the whole concept of duality is now at its peak, and our differences are really, really, really being highlighted like never before. But we're also being given the opportunity to either remain in judgment and separation or to evolve to the higher consciousness of appreciation and oneness. So there are so many things out there now over which we have become divided. Religion has been dividing us for a long, long time. Then politics came along, race, class. Those are the big, broad categories. But now it seems like we are becoming divided over ever more specific and smaller things where people are either firmly on one side or the other, and the sides are becoming further and further apart. And so we have a decision to make, each of us individually. Will we continue to live in separation consciousness, fueled by the constant judgment of those we see as on the other side from us? Or will we choose to accept that they too are on a journey. And that journey is not the same as ours, and that we need them to be on their journey. Can we be happy to let them have their journey and understand that's just the nature of the duality of this earth plane? Can we shift into appreciating the interactions we have with them and use them as grist for the mill of our own awakening? So in other words, since we're here in this process of awakening, walking each other home back to a place of oneness, which involves us being down here on this earth in a place of duality while we're on the way back to oneness, can we use the duality to our advantage for our growth rather than letting it keep separating us further and further away from each other? In a recent sermon, and this was this was from my teaching, so recent meant when I gave this teaching, my brother spoke about happy to be abnormal. And one of the quotes he used was from Viktor Frankl, who said, "An abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal behavior." So he, my brother, then expanded on it by adding, if hatred is abnormal and I react abnormally to hatred, really all I'm doing is being normal. So if we believe that happiness is our normal state, that love is our essence, then when the norm becomes something other than that, which, as I just pointed out, it now has, because the norm now is separation and division, how do we react to it? Well, we can go along with it. We can conform to what the majority of the world is doing, or we can say, hey, this is abnormal. We're not supposed to be so divided. We're not supposed to be so polarized. There aren't supposed to be this many topics and people that we feel so strongly about that we either love or hate, and we also love or hate anyone who has a different opinion about them than us, because we can't accept that those people are on their own journey. That's abnormal. Yet, that's where we seem to be. The normal response to that would be conformity. But it's an abnormal situation. So we should respond abnormally and not conform. Like I was saying before, instead of doubling down and going further into or toward whatever side you're already on, just flip it around and try to go back to the middle. The Living Bible says it like this: don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, duality, but be a new and different person with a fresh newness in all you do and think. Then you will learn from your own experience how his ways really will satisfy you. And I would add, and you'll let others learn what they came to learn here from their experiences, which might be very different from yours. Continuing on. Don't just pretend you love others, really love them. Hate what is wrong. In other words, react abnormally when the situation is abnormal, which would be anything other than love. Stand on the side of good. Love each other with brotherly affection and take delight in honoring each other. Never be lazy in your work, but serve the Lord enthusiastically. All right, so I want to stop right here and say, when it says don't just pretend to love others, really love them, some of you might say, how? How can I love people who behave in ways that I find abhorrent? How can I love people who wish me ill and who might even want to be violent towards me? You can do it by being happy and content to let them have their own journey. And know that just as you are exactly where you're supposed to be, so are they, even if that seems to be the polar opposite from where you are. Don't conform and return hate for hate. Learn to use the fact that they are on the other side from you to find the truth that's held in the tension in the middle between those two opposites, right in the middle of the two of you. Learn to use your interactions with them as grist for your mill of awakening. And as the end of that Ram Dass quote says, learn to appreciate and honor the incredible diversity of the universe. If we were all the same, we'd never learn anything because there would be nothing for us to bump up against, as it were. And that's how we learn, at least while we're down here on earth, through duality, through our differences. Okay, so that's one way that we can transcend or get out of this place we seem to be in now, is to shift our judgment of others to appreciation, acceptance, and love. But what about self-judgment? Let's go now to my brother's message from Sunday, 2 days ago, to see that the key to not judging others begins with not judging ourselves. And he also talks about not allowing the circumstances around us to take away our joy. He said one of Frederick Douglass's most famous quotes is that where there is no struggle, there is no progress. But a lot of people don't know that he also said this: don't drown in the struggle. In other words, you can struggle, you can fight, you can protest, you can be involved in activism for every issue that is important to you. You can do all of this and be in the struggle without letting your soul get crushed. I've seen pictures of Martin Luther King in the midst of death threats, in the midst of being imprisoned, in the midst of knowing he may not make it to the end of the fight. He knew he might very well be assassinated, but he would have moments of joy. They would bring him a birthday cake or have a little wine. Every once in a while, he had a cigarette. He had to find a way to say, look, I'm in the struggle, but it's not crushing me. I'm still a person who has joy, because if I allow my spirit to be crushed, I cannot bring love to the world. It is a crushed spirit that sees the racist as an enemy. It was Martin Luther King who said the only power in the universe that can transmute and transform an enemy into a friend is the power of love. You can't speak that way from a crushed soul. You can't speak that level of wisdom from a broken spirit. It doesn't mean that things don't happen. It means those things are not me. I am love. I am light. I am joy. I am peace. So then he goes into the power of laughter and what it does for your self-worth. He says, laughter signals that I am no longer in a battle with my self-worth. I love that part. I am no longer struggling to accept me. I am able to laugh at myself. Think about the day that Jesus was baptized. As Jesus walks up to his cousin, John the Baptist, in the River Jordan, John looks up and says, behold, the Lamb of God, who takes away the sin or the offense of the world. After the baptism, the scripture records some very interesting imagery. It says that a dove descended and a light shines from heaven, out of which a voice says, this is my son, in whom I am well pleased. And then he was a little funny himself. He said, okay, he hadn't taught anything yet. He hadn't healed anybody. He hadn't turned the water into wine. He hadn't opened blind Bartimaeus' eyes. He hadn't walked on water. He hadn't preached one sermon, good or bad. And still, God says, I am pleased. What does that mean? It means there's nothing you can do to make God pleased with you, or nothing you have to do, I would add. God is pleased because you are who you are. Okay, time out for a second. If God said this and felt this about Jesus, follow my logic again, and we're all one, then that means this is how he feels about all of us, even Donald Trump. Even all those people on the other end of the spectrum from you, even all those people you think are dead wrong, and all those people who think you are dead wrong. God is pleased with all of us just for who we are. And when we really get that into our heads and hearts, it makes it a little easier not to judge someone else's journey. Again, we need those people for now to be on the other side from us, so that there can even be a middle way to find. If there are no sides, there is no middle. We've got to let everybody have their own journey. So let's go back to this concept as we're wrapping this up today of using others and the differences we see in others, those things that trigger us, those things we want to judge them for. How can we use those things to transcend that judgment and get to a place where we use all of this polarization we're experiencing in the world right now for our own good and our own growth? I just quoted from my brother's sermon on Sunday where he talked about not letting the struggle of life itself crush your spirit. So let's hear it from a little different perspective now. We're going back to the podcast with Aubrey Marcus and Robert Grant. Aubrey Marcus is talking now, and he says, there's a quote by Friedrich Nietzsche that I've seen really play out over the last couple of years. And it basically says, be careful when you stare into the abyss, because eventually it will stare back at you. I've noticed people being really focused on all the darkness that has exposed itself in the world over the last few years. and they have looked into it so deeply and so consistently every day that the darkness has started to creep inside them. And they've gotten sucked into this field of resonance with the darkness and have allowed it to almost swallow them up. It's beginning to change them. And this is something for all of us to be mindful of. Be careful of staring only into the abyss for too long. Or, the way my brother was saying it on Sunday, don't let the struggle crush your spirit. Don't let it steal your joy. Because when you do that, when you start taking things too seriously and you never allow yourself to have a lighthearted moment, then this happens, okay? Then we start to let it creep in. Back to Aubrey Marcus. He's looking at it from the standpoint of what happens to you when you spend too much time focusing on the darkness in the world and everything that's wrong with the world. He says, we all start out wanting to do the right thing. But when we're too narrowly focused, we feel that we see everything better than everyone else, and we should be the arbiter of justice. So let's get on Twitter and cancel this person or that person for whatever they said that we believe is wrong and that we disagree with. And then the other man, Robert Grant, jumps in and he gives an example of this. He said a friend of his whose policy is to only put positive things on her social media pages, he was reading her page and another person came and made a comment under one of her posts accusing her as being an example of toxic positivity. Okay, time out. I feel about the concept of toxic positivity the same way I feel about boundaries. I've heard people use this phrase before, and it always rubs me the wrong way. What they're meaning by accusing someone of this is that they're sticking their head in the sand and they're ignoring the truth. Well, first of all, whose truth? We've already pretty much established that everybody has a different truth from their perspective, so you can't really say that. And secondly, what in the world could ever be toxic about being positive? Even in the worst of circumstances, there is joy to be found somewhere. There's always a silver lining, even if it's very small. So I don't understand this concept of people wanting to tell others that their positive outlook is toxic. If you want to be sad and angry and, as my daddy says, all sold up, be my guest. But don't drag me into your negativity. Don't rain on my parade. If I want to remain positive and choose to see the good in every situation, let me do it. More people should. Okay, rant over. So he finishes this story by saying that he went to this guy's page, the one who had made this comment, accusing his friend of being toxically positive. And the cover photo on the guy's page identifies him as the defender of the oppressed and the weak. And he says, you know, we all want to be the hero. But when we start to force our view of the world on everyone around us, it takes on a very negative feel that is full of judgment for anyone who does not think and behave exactly as we do. As we said earlier, when you enter the cave of judgment, you take on the characteristics of the cave. And when you begin to judge others, you actually lower yourself to a level beneath them. So in other words, he's saying, in an effort to do a good thing, to defend those people you perceive to be weak and oppressed, side note, time out, maybe that's just their journey. Controversial opinion that we don't have time to get into today, but it's worth considering. Perhaps you don't need to defend them because perhaps they're learning a lesson they came here to learn. Okay, back to my original thought and to his point. In an effort to do a good thing, you've become a bad person, or let's say a negative person, a person who judges others. Maybe you're not a bad person, but you're exhibiting bad behavior. So what have you gained? All you've done is alienate other people and isolate yourself and your side even further, making it less possible or less likely that anybody else is going to agree with you. So again, how do we move past all this? How do we transcend beyond the age of the two fish tied together but going in different directions, each thinking they're right and that they're on the side of right, defending the truth? How do we hold on to our joy and avoid allowing our spirit to be crushed by the struggle? How do we cooperate rather than keep going round and round in circles of endless conflict? Well, As I was saying Sunday, we have to jump up to that higher consciousness where we are the one, we are the hand holding the pendulum. And in order to do that, we've got to look at ourselves in a way that we truly see what's there, past all our agendas and justifications and biases and filters. We have to come face to face with uprightness and see if we truly measure up. My brother talked about that process on Sunday as Jesus experienced it in the wilderness. He picks up the story after Jesus was baptized. When he left there, the Bible says he was driven into the wilderness by the Holy Spirit to be tempted by the devil. In Aramaic, the word for devil or Satan is the word akucha, which translates to uprightness. And the conversation he has in the wilderness is really with his own ego. The ego, or Satan, the devil, says to Jesus, "Hey, I bet you can't come up on this high mountain and throw yourself down. Because if you really are who you say you are, God in the flesh, then if you throw yourself off this mountain, the angels will come and pick you up." And Jesus answered, "You're not going to tempt God that way." The second temptation came when Satan said, "Jesus, you haven't eaten for 40 days. Why don't you take these stones and turn them into bread?" And Jesus replied, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of the Father." At every turn, the temptation was to do something to prove he was who he said he was. Do something to prove that you're good enough, that you're worthy of God's love. Work harder, work faster, behave, wear this, shut up, sit down, speak up, walk over there, taste this, make me happy, do what I say. And once you've proven yourself, then maybe we can talk about love. The reason many of us cannot really give into laughter is because we are riddled with the temptation to prove ourselves. I don't want to laugh because somebody might think I'm not serious enough. I don't really want to let loose because that might make them think they can treat me any way they want. Okay, so do you hear the defensiveness in that? That's what I hear, total self-defense. And when you always feel the need to defend yourself, sometimes that gets projected onto others. Like this guy we were just talking about, whose cover photo is proclaiming him to be the defender of the weak and the oppressed. All that says to me, it is a giant neon flashing sign saying, I feel weak and oppressed. I feel weak and oppressed. But instead of looking at that and facing that about yourself, you go on the attack and start attacking people and accusing them of toxic positivity, which makes no sense. It's not even a thing. It's an oxymoron. Instead of dealing with and addressing your own feelings of inadequacy, you become everyone else's defender instead of allowing them to have their own journey and learn their own lessons. And you attack others in the process. And that eventually leads to the joyless life of a person whose spirit has been crushed. So it all comes back to the choice I spoke about at the beginning today. How are we going to use our words? And what are we going to focus on? Will we build up or will we tear down? Even if it's in the name of something we think is righteous, even if it's in the name of defending who we think are the weak and the oppressed, still, how are you going to do it? You're going to try to build something up, or you're going to just try to tear others down who you believe to be wrong? Will we provide hope or create despair? Will we make someone's day or ruin it? Will we transcend the temptation to judge others and use our differences as a tool to help us find the middle way? Or will we go into the cave of judgment where the law of resonance will bring nothing but more judgment to us and on us? So there's so much more to say about this subject. There might be, I'm going to go ahead and there might be a part 2 next week because actually that podcast I was listening to was 2.5 hours and they covered so much more information that I want to get to. But for today, I want to leave you with this affirmation. My greatest dreams have already been realized. My deepest desires have been with me all along. I work on myself, my greatest masterpiece, to bring the miracle within to realization. I find freedom in forgiveness, liberation in compassion, and peace in love. Amen. And so it is. Here's my brother coming up here with his dapper hat.
What's up? Every day is Mother's Day. So. Anybody have any love for Larry Scott? Does anybody have any? I was raised by Larry Scott. He does speak his own language, but let me tell you something. Between all the every day's Mother's Day, 100 plus is not enough. Plead the blood, Jesus, healthy mind, healthy body, for the resurrection. And occasionally when he was transitioning thoughts, he would say, now, daughter, listen to me, son. Are you listening to me, son? I'm like, yes, sir, I get the so. He would drop nuggets of wisdom and truth. You got a nugget, a morsel, an appetizer. You got something good today. What is that? That there is balance in all of it. The light, the dark, the middle way, celebrating other people's journey. What a balanced teaching. Learning tolerance. You know, we really can't celebrate each other. We can't live in one love until we learn to at least tolerate. Isn't it kind of an oxymoron to say, I love to live in a country where we're free, and then tell other people, think just like me? What you can't do. You have to allow, okay, if we live in a country where freedom of expression is there, even though something might turn your stomach, it might be something that you feel is hateful, the same way we get to express what Spirit and Truth Sanctuary is, a place for all of God's children who are welcome and wanted, we've got to say, hey, other religious denominations, they have the right to express, and that is really learning to live without the binary. That it's in some ways it's all good, it's all resonating, it's all voices that matter. And so, what a good teaching today. I wore my hat because even though it's raining outside, I'm picturing myself on a beach. I'm laying on a beach with a margarita and telling Brandy, no, I didn't look at that woman that just walked by. What do you mean? I don't know what you're talking about. David Michael's like, you teach it right there. We love you guys. Hope you have some joy in your heart. Hope you have a great day. This is a great way to start out the week. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow night, the last night of the Gifts of Imperfection. It's been such a good journey with Brene Brown. Looking forward to sharing that conversation with you tomorrow night. And then we'll see you on Sunday morning, either virtually or in person. Go in peace. We love you guys.